Great to see you, Jeff. Great to see you, Alexander.
Nice
Lovely.
to see you. Nice to see you both.
Gentlemen.
This is a big one. He said, looking into the mic, he just unintentionally. When Alexander and I first thought about doing this series on Goethe, because of conversations we had last summer, we were looking at the contents of this book, GA2, and there are 21 chapters, but it's actually divided up into 6 sections. And we decided that, yeah, it seems like it's reasonable to dedicate like one session like we're doing here to 3 chapters or so, which is how the book is divided up. These chapters, personally, for me, have taken me to a new and deeper and more profound understanding of what this organ of thinking, what it means to have an organ of thinking living in us. And it is the fruit. Obviously, the previous 10 chapters were needed, but 11 to 14, something really magical happens in this book for me. And we're not going to be able to capture that. Really, each one of these chapters should have its own like hour and a half session like we're going to give here. But we're going to stick to the plan that we set out, and who knows, we might revisit it and it might come up. It's like aspects of it again in later talks that we do. But this is an incredibly rich part. We've been involved together in other groups with Matt, and I think the 3 of us, we've both experienced how these lectures, or in this case this book, they come together. It's like this synergy of working together in a group. We really feel as if conceptually we grow in our understandings, and this is that moment for me. Not that the other sessions weren't that, but something has really fundamentally changed in this in these 4 chapters for me. So really looking forward to looking at, and it will be skimming the surface of these profound chapters in GA2. Yeah. So we had the first chapter, or chapter 11, which is called Thinking and Perception. And what is he trying to, what's the picture he's trying to paint? There are several pictures, and I'll paint one of them, and then we'll go around circle like we normally do and see where it takes us, and if there are any questions around the chapter. One of the ideas that we're confronted with, it's like in even ever starker relief, is this idea that perception without thinking is absolutely nothing. It is contentless. It's only thinking. He gives this picture of, or he uses the wording of a core or an essence or being of something that is always hidden to perception. It's always hidden to the senses. It can never be revealed in the senses. And it is only when we look at when we contemplate perceptions with thinking that its essence actually reveals itself to us, or its being, its inherent lawfulness. Lawfulness is a word that's often come up before in this book, and even right at the beginning. I mean, he's using, it's like almost for me a poetic language right at the beginning of 11, when he says, he leads in, science permeates perceived reality with the concepts grasped and worked through by our thinking. No problem. Through what our spirit by its activity has raised out of the darkness of mere potentiality into the light of reality, science complements and deepens. So this picture is we've got these concepts, these infinite possibilities that are there, and they are waiting for us to create discover them. We create them with our own spiritual activity, or the organ of thinking perceives them through its active nature. Perceiving usually seems to mean like a passive relationship to something, but this is one of those confusing aspects until you get your head around it, that our activity actually illumines, creates the concepts at the same time, and they live within our spirit, and our spirit is then able to recognize them as being outside. It's like in the phenomena, whatever it is. And he then goes on to link that to this important aspect of how judgments are formed. He distinguishes between two types of judgments where you are combining something, a percept, with a concept, i.e. you've got sensory evidence for it, for that judgment being true. But then you've also got what Kant would call a priori judgments, but which Steiner just says, no, these are judgments where a concept is linked to another concept through it's like the essence of its own being, and there is no direct, it's like sensorial manifestation of that. It's something that happens within thinking. So summing up, one way of summing up chapter 11 might be in the simple phrase, which is sentence number 10 in there. No concept equals no understanding. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I appreciated how Steiner here is very dedicated to explain how concept and percept are intimately related in the activity of thinking, and how important it is to clarify their relationship in how we approach the world with our organ of thinking. I mean, one thing that I was a bit reflecting on, this section is called science, but in reality what he is speaking about is the activity of knowledge, which could be applied to science, to art, to philosophy. So just that we don't feel a bit estranged from this chapter if we're not scientists. He's speaking of an activity that we all can relate to if we are entertaining a more deep reflection into the nature of something that we are interested in. And I was also a bit struck, like you, Angus, about the emphasis on the conceptual side of concept, percept. Yeah, that without a concept, the world will simply appear to us, well, as pure experience, as a fuzzy repetition of sense perceptions that we can't sort of bring together in any meaningful way.
Mm.
And I think that goes on as a thread until the end of this chapter, where he says that the essential being is dissolved into ideal content as the sort of fruit of this activity, which relates a little bit, I think. I mean, these are for me a bit philosophical words, but ideal content for me relates to the archetype or the universal. And it's that relationship between the universal and the particular, the concept and the percept, that Steiner is sort of giving us here, how we can discern that activity in our thinking and become clear how they relate to each other.
Why do you think in this, and that's a lovely image, isn't it? The essential being dissolves into ideal content. I mean, we have a lot of presumptions in modern thinking about what that might mean if reality were living in the essential nature of things were living in an ideal content. That would be accused of being an essentialist in the current framework, but it would be to misunderstand this, I think. But why do you think he says the essential being dissolves into ideal content?
This is one of the beautiful things here, is that when we realize that absolutely zero knowledge is possible without thinking, so none of the essence of the world is available to us through our senses. It is only in the ideal content that we work our way towards the essence of anything, and that therefore, if we're looking for the essence, if we're looking for the essence of a plant, we have to phenomenologically observe it, and slowly it will reveal its essence to us. But what we've done, with that one flower, if we then bring that out to the whole of life, we're still involved in the same process, the same activity of thinking, that there is the ideal content, the essence of whatever it is we happen to direct our observation towards. It is thinking that reveals its essence there. Does that ring true, or does that make sense in answer to your question, Jeff, or is it still lacking? If it's still lacking, I'd love to have another crack.
I'm wondering how that is different from a Hegelian idealism.
Good, excellent. So one of the things he says is that, Hegel would say, thinking is the whole of reality, and this is where Steiner performs this wonderful move. I can't remember what was the example in here, so I'll give my own example. So let's say the concept of a bike. So conceptually, we understand what a bike is, okay? But there are an infinity of manifestations of what a bike can actually be. And this is the essence of it. That's it's only actually by linking these two, this concept that we've got of something, and then we recognize a manifestation of it in life. It's, if you go to Eastern philosophy, it's this idea of transcendent and immanent. And how does he say it? He says this in another way at line 13. He says, thinking is the interpreter of the gestures of experience, or words to that effect. And again, this is this essential idea that it is only with thinking that we can approach the essential of anything. But when we see that one thing, it is only one manifestation of an infinite, it's like number of possible manifestations. I'm trying to think what was the example in the book. Was it bodies? That's right. He talked about bodies attracting one another, like as a conceptual. He was talking about gravity and how they can like attract one another. And he says, okay, so that's a conceptually sort of like true picture, but that truth can manifest itself in an infinite number of ways. And this is why thinking needs what we normally call reality or sensory reality or perception, so that it can see a revelation of what is inherent in its infiniteness. I actually this morning I went off because this idea of infinite, it's really interesting. I'm going to like jump out of the book here for a second, but if you look at Spinoza and his reflections on the infinite, or you look at Cantor's set theory on the infinite, there was something beautiful I read this morning. This is from Georg Cantor, who is like the creator of set theory, which basically proved that there are more. If you imagine an infinite series of numbers, and they are rational numbers, i.e. like numbers that are whole numbers or can be represented as a fraction of these numbers, there are more irrational numbers than there are. So you've got an infinite number of numbers and you've got infinite sets. But actually, the set of irrational numbers, if you remember our astronomy course, the set of irrational numbers is even larger. And it's like but all of these infinities that he's playing with, Cantor here, he says this about mathematics: the essence or the being of mathematics lies in its freedom. So in infinity, he is discovering freedom. And Hilbert, who is also like a mathematician, creator of Hilbert, or he created this concept of Hilbert space. He says of Cantor, from the paradise that Cantor created for us, nobody shall drive us away. The link here with what Steiner is talking about with concept is infinite. It's when we begin to live in the infinite, we experience freedom, but it's like one aspect. So a concept is essentially infinite. That is its essence, which means it is a no thing, because no thing can be everything. It needs to choose how it's going to manifest itself. Yeah. Did that come any closer?
It's very helpful, I will say. And there's so many directions we can go. I'll be patient because this gets fleshed out in the next 3 chapters. Mm-hmm. But what I take from this, in this case, is that there's if and I don't want to claim or presume that the existence is a totality, right? That there is something called universal or infinite, right? I don't want to claim right. It seems to be the case that there's particulars and there are universals. And if that's the case, then we're part as particulates of a universal no thing. And as cognitive beings, we produce concepts, and so those concepts must, by this very principle, have a universal aspect and a particular aspect. Yes. Okay, I can stay with that.
A universal is living in us when we recognize that concept, and it is because that universal is living in that organ of thinking that we are actually able to have knowledge of it. Otherwise, it would be one of the pictures that I have is like, imagine, I might have used this picture again, but it's still valid here. Imagine you've got a sack. That's like this sack is like moving around. It's making all of these movements. And you look at the sack and say, that's a strange sack. And somebody says, well, no, the reason is there's a cat inside or something like that. I mean, it's a statement of the obvious, but the essence of the movement lies in the cat and not in the sack. And thinking is that which leads us to the essence of what is happening, like in the perceptual world. It's this term that he uses is the core. It's the essence which cannot be known of without thinking. Any understanding has to happen in the realm of thinking. It sounds like a statement of the obvious, but when that truth really strikes home to you, you realize that all essence can only be discovered through thinking and not through perception. It's the polar opposite of the scientific process. Scientific process, it believes it's getting the whole truth when it observes, but it's forgetting the whole time the thinking process that is being like brought to bear on that. And this is what is part of what is going on here. Is really, it is no exaggeration to say no thinking or no concept equals no understanding, equals no knowledge. And it's only because this process is an unconscious process happening in us the whole time that we are not aware of this. I was thinking about this when I went out for a walk, that in the way that Aristotle changed, it's like from mythical thinking, it's like mythical poetic thinking, to this scientific, let's study phenomena. It seems strange to us as modern people that people could have not chosen to observe nature, to make deductions about the nature of reality. What is happening here with this phenomenological description of thinking is we are being woken up to a process that is living in us the whole time, and most of the time we're asleep when it's happening. We're asleep to the reality of its own activity.
Okay, so what is one for me so far? One, not one, but victorious.
WON.
Yeah, captured, let's say.
Yeah.
Is that, and I'm going to borrow from Witzigmann's fourfold structure, is that we see we're in relationship with a world of appearances, and it's a totality of multiplicity in a sense, right? So it's like, at first, if I don't bring concepts to it, I can't see the connections, right? So that's a problem for human beings, and this particularly with our consciousness, right? So that creates a tension, an inner tension, and that tension creates a polarity between me and this vast, mysterious reality that is confounding to me. And then there has to be a resolution, and then through working with those polarities, right? The me and the out there. It's easier with people in a certain respect because we can use the same gestures to speak to that beautiful line that he uses as relates to perception and thinking. But with the mysterious outer world, that polarity has to be resolved, or there is no knowledge. And so in order to resolve polarities, you have to have a process of metamorphosis. And in that case, and I'm getting a little ahead of us now, I think, but I'm trying to grasp where we are, and so I'm just going to do this anyway. In order to resolve this tension, working with both poles, the perceptual and me as a cognitive being, I have to think, right? And so thinking by its very nature must be lawfully metamorphic. In other words, it must lawfully be working with it must come into contact with the two polarities as one thing, but still separate. That paradox, the koan that Paul Kingsnorth talks about, that the Christian, that's the Christian problem, right? And so this is a religious claim, or not claims, not the right word, but you mentioned in our warm-up that you had like a religious experience with this, and this is and Alexander mentioned that that it's a misnomer to call this chapter science, because it's really about creation, both from an artistic standpoint and from a religious principle standpoint. So if this metamorphosis does resolve this polarity, and I'm not saying it does, I'm just saying that's definitely the process, and we definitely have to take it up. If this metamorphosis is resolving this process, of course it would dissolve back into that which is no longer evident. It dissolves back to that which is inherent in the multiplicity that I first saw when I faced the world as a mystery. So it goes back into the mystery, right? But we've added something to that. And if that's not what we call imminence, I don't know what is. And if that's not what the Christ means when he says ye are gods, then I don't know what is meant by that. And that's religious knowledge. That's religious knowing. And this is I get what you're saying about that now. So I can say that I'm not sure about what I've just said, but I have a strong feeling for it, right? And so just to finish, Witzman describes that which is appearances at the beginning, perception, essentially the perceptual pole, as evident, obviously. And evidence does nothing. Our science depends on evidence. Positivism he brings on the table in chapter 11. It depends on evidence, but evidence is just appearances. It's like in medicine, epidemiology is just statistics. It's just a visual circumstances, and it doesn't prove anything, right? It doesn't make anything evident in the sense of truth, right? And so if that's the case, and then this tension and metamorphosis occurs, what a gift. And then that's the dissolution into the essential being dissolving into the, what does he say? The ideal content. So then the ideal content is the self-same reality that you faced when it was completely baffling to you. That's knowledge, I guess.
Alexander, I've got two minor points I wanted to make, but would you like to come in there?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in just with a few comments. Let's see what I had in my mind. Well, one thing is about this religious aspect, which I also agree that, entering this kind of work has a religious component to it, about overcoming the separateness that our intellect or analytical thinking has created. And he will speak a little bit about that when he speaks about people realizing the unity of reality through feeling, and that you can also do that through reason, which also is one way of looking into it. And it would be interesting to discuss a little bit what the difference would be between having a feeling perception of unity and a reason perception of unity, if those words make sense.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was also just, I mean, this might be a bit far-fetched, but well, one thing is, I think it's difficult to approach these this way of knowledge if you're applying it to very concrete phenomena that we have acquired and are very acquainted with, like the concept and the percept of a dog or a tree, or yeah, I mean, whatever, even a bit more sophisticated concepts. But it's difficult to grasp the activity in its details that Steiner is speaking about here. I mean, I can see it myself. It's the exercises in Goethean science that I've done, say, observing a plant, the metamorphosis of a plant, that has allowed me to grasp the grasp and observe in my thinking this process from a sense perception to the contemplation or the perceiving of the archetype. And that's, you know, I mean, I agree with you, Angus, that has been going on all the time as we've been involved in thinking, but we're not awake to it as we grow up. And it seems that, yeah, that would be also interesting to just question, okay, but why haven't we been awake to that? But it feels to me it was just when a very difficult problem arose in my life. The problem of Goethean science and going into the imaginative thinking, and also the pain of separateness, that the analytical thinking, and wanting to overcome that. It was that problem that gave momentum for me to start to observe what my thinking was involved in, and what process is taking me across that divideness. And I mean, my experience is that the ideal content or the archetype is formless. And that's what I've sort of, that's this idea of that the sense perception dissolves. And in sense perception, we have form not only in sort of solid shape, but all like sounds, and let's call sounds and smells and touch, let's call all of those things, all of those sense perceptions form. And then the archetype for me, my experience of it was that it is formless. But it's also, another thing is that, I mean, it doesn't mean that, or that's also a question that would be interesting to bring up here. I mean, does that mean that these two aspects are real in a separate sense? Is there form, and is there the archetype as two separate realities? Or is it, and he will go into this, I think, when he's speaking about Kant towards the end of the section. But I've always wondered, I mean, like, are they two separate things, two separate realities, or is it that I have the ability to see them from one side, but also from another side? And then it goes down to the use of this word essence, which sometimes can be a bit confusing or misleading, because he's speaking to the human being. So if we were angels, we would live in the ideal side of reality, and we would probably struggle to find the sense perception of those ideas. But if we did overcome that separation, we would probably call the percepts as the essence of reality, wouldn't we? I think so. I think it's good just to turn those things around and just see that we are where we are as human beings, and this is our vantage point. But in a way, we also can go, we don't have to sort of be caught into our vantage point as the essence, the true reality, the absolute reality, isn't it?
Beautiful, Alexander. You said you said a ton of interesting things that, I mean, each one of those points that you raised so like could lead to a 20-30 minute conversation. I'm going to choose two of them, and the second one is going to lead us into the next chapter, because of your particular expression was really useful there. And as fact is 2.5. Sorry, this comment about science, this confusing. Of course, in German, the word for science is Wissenschaft, which means the knowing of things. So it doesn't have that flavor that it has in English. So even there, we're finding how language is, to a certain extent, like leading us down one track. And that's not the track that's actually far, far broader than what an English-speaking person would understand as science. Wissenschaft, Vetskap, it's like in Swedish, is something is far broader. It's knowingness, you could call it perhaps as well. One of the things you talked about with it's like how to imagine what formlessness is, and your questions and your descriptions of playing with that idea, trying to create clarity for yourself. It is so interesting that one of the basic exercises, not the 6 basic exercises, but there's an esoteric exercise, and all you're supposed to do is in your mind's eye try to imagine the infinite possibilities of a triangle. So the triangle is always moving, it's never static, but it's always adhering to the truth of what makes up a triangle, 3 lines. And when you perform that, you realize what it is you're trying to do. You're trying to see infinity, like the infinite possibilities that are given by a simple concept. So it's very interesting that's like, even in the simplest of esoteric exercises that Steiner will give, you've got this idea that you are communicating now. That's like living into this infinity and trying to make it an experience to us. So how am I going to lead us on to chapter 12? It's the wonderful thing you said there, Alexander, which was, your words were the pain of separateness. I'm going to shut up for a while I know you two both want to talk a lot about this chapter, and I'll no doubt I'll chime in as well. But it leads us straight into chapter 12. Who would like to take it up?
I'm extremely moved by what you just pulled off there, Alexander. My God, literally, I guess. One of the things I'm thinking about before sort of dealing with the polarities of chapter 12 and the importance of those polarities in the Trinity, let's say, is I was thinking of the angels. Before you said that, I was thinking from an angelic realm, and that we are the perceivers for the angels, and right. But I never did that thought experiment, which is a really important one before, where you said for them the essence is in a perceivable form, and for us it's in a formless perception. That's what you're saying with experience, right? That's stunning, and it gives me a more intimate feeling for the phenomenology of the hierarchy of being. So if that hierarchy of being, if there are spirits of form, which we know as exousiae, and there are spirits of personality, which we know as archai, then you sort of can see how form and personality, in other words, the self, are extraordinarily important to reality, right? From a spiritually describable perspective of a chain of being, or a hierarchy of being. So then the dynamists, which are the spiritual hierarchy just above the spirits of form, must be formless. They're just the forces. They're just the forces. Now we're talking about a different intelligence expressing itself, influencing the spirits of form, and influencing the spirits of personality. So to me, that puts a potency on what the human soul is as a form that is also formless. So it is a, what's the German term? Gestalt.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's the whole human form. And in fact, in interdisciplinary astronomy, he talks about the human gestalt in relationship to the cosmos. So I just wanted to bring that in there, because for me, that potentizes this whole process that we're talking about, when you can people the universe with beings as a potent. And I think that's why he says the essential being dissolves into the universal. So I'll just lead off as relates to the polarity then, if you don't mind. There's on one side there's the analytic, and then on the other side there's the thing he calls reason. And the analytic is that which, of course, by the very nature of the word, tears things apart. But it's a conceptual tearing apart. It's not the confusion of multiplicity. It's the need to order things such that they can be named, if you will, or conceptualized, concrete concepts. And that's a very important process. The romantic in me wants to villainize the analytical, because we are as Ian McGilchrist called, a left brain dominated culture. And that's what is tearing the world apart, literally, self-destructively, right? So that's a kind of thinking. It's a given involuntary thinking that we do. It needs to be taken up voluntarily, not eschewed like I'm wont to do. And then the other side is reason, and reason has this need to combine things, and it's what Wittgenstein calls recomposition. So one is decomposing, the other is recomposing. And I'm not going to go in a direction here as relates to the decomposition of the colonial gaze, but I have a critique of that has to do with this. It's important, but it's ideologically bereft. So then the reason wants to combine things. And what I came with, and then he says there's essentially a self bias, a biased self that's in the center of that. And this presents the possibility of a duality, but it's also the resolution of the duality that is described between the need for combining and the need for decomposing. We have to organize things in our mind before we can put them back together, so to speak. And one of the things I thought about was the way in which a one-sided analytics results in the fragmented world we live in, and unbridled growth in capitalism, and everything is object, and everything is then a resource to be exploited because the underlying relationships are not seen or valued or have any meaning. And then on the other side, you have this totalitarian picture. If you move, you can see why Marx took Hegel, bastardized Hegel, and made it into Homo economicus as Marxism communism, right? Because it's a totalitarian picture of combination, but it's only proposed or speculated combination that there's a totality. Religious dogma does the same thing, right? And I think Steiner says here that unbridled reasoning leads to the abstraction away from the actual underlying perceptual connection with the way relationships occur, right? And so then what I really took from this too, which is just made stronger as a feeling from Alexander, is that these two things, this reason in the analytic, they need a self to mediate, right? But they need to be imbued with that self. Both need to be imbued with that self, so that you're not just combining, right, overly right-braining this process and making your logic fuzzy. You still want to remain clear in your differentiations. And as a differentiating being, then what we do and can do is that the combinatorial conclusion that dissolves into the universality can be inverted into the individual particular, and that the particular inverts then into the synthetical, right? So the idea is to bring the synthetical into the analytical in order to put the parts back together, and then the individuating process is a universalizing into a individual form, and see, that's what I took out of this, and that's a relationship, right? That's a real relationship between the universal and the individual, and we can't have that relationship unless we have individual form.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. I think you brought up a lot of good points to this chapter about how we need to sort of bring these two aspects of the analytical and the synthetical together, and let them work in a comprehensive way with reality. I mean, for me, I'm going to relate this back to my exercises in Goethean science. I think one thing that happened throughout the years, I mean, first engage in plant observation when I was doing my biodynamic training, but then also a bit in a more, let's say, informal way, because I was taking my insights from those observations into my everyday life, I realized that it was possible for me to sort of discern when my, let's call it, like Steiner uses the word reason, was active. So I could discern in a way when I was applying a holistic thinking in how it was informing my intellect or analytical thinking. I mean, it wasn't very clear, but there were definitely experiences of both activities, in the same way as I could, I don't write with my left hand, but if I would practice, I could learn how to write with my left hand, and I would be aware if I was using my right hand to write or draw, and I would be aware if I was using my left hand to write or draw. I think in the same way, if you practice and develop these organs, you will come to experience when one is active and the other is active. We are so used to developing and using our analytical thinking that it might seem almost strange to say, well, there is another way of thinking that you can develop and train and become aware of. But my experience is that yes, it is possible, and I only have inklings of it sometimes. When it happens, I'm quite sure that it is happening. And I relate back to the last time we were speaking about how the artistic process is one where you can start to experience it a little bit. When you have that sense in a poem, or I remember you, Jeff, speaking about dancing, when you sort of have been sort of struggling, let's say, with, well, let's take dance as an example. Say you're trying to learn some steps of a dance, and if you're learning some steps, everything feels a little bit like your movement is very awkward and separated and out of sync. And you're struggling with that and working with that until the body finally gets it. And you can dance those steps in a flowing movement. So I think that's possible to experience that in your thinking as well. You can realize the difference between these both types of thinking.
Love your description there, Alexander. It's like bringing what sounds like abstract, perhaps even pointless thinking, and like reminding us that it permeates so much of our life. It's like this moving from sort of like a hacked up, or like multiple piece. It's like where there is no relationship between things, and so there's confusion. There's perhaps a sense of discomfort, and then suddenly it all comes together. I think that's reflected what you're saying in two ways in the text. One of them is where he distinguishes between intellectual, or let's call them analytical. I think it is good to use lots of words around the same concept. You know, this concept is infinite. It's going to have lots of different names. But this, and he, in the book, it's actually even translated as intelligence, which also doesn't feel satisfactory. I like what you said earlier, Jeff, about analytical. Sort of like it brings the chopping up nature, the diabolic nature into it. And he reflects that actually often it's people who don't have that analytical capacities like so well developed that they rely more on their feeling life, and it's like instinctually they're saying it's like there's some sort of unity going on there, and that this, but he says that this isn't this is fully understandable within the context of when we understand this dual aspect of thinking. It's analytical, it chops up, it's like it distinguishes it, it puts names on things, it separates, but it's separating from what was initially a whole. So it's not sort of like, it's not that they're creating an activity that so like they shouldn't do. No, actually it's the intellect that took that whole, chopped and diced it, and now needs reason or synthetic thinking to actually recombine what is chopped up. And here I think we begin to understand at an even deeper level something that we touched on when we did GA3 as well, Jeff. So why is this question that Kant has, how are a priori synthetic judgments possible? Because what we're asking there is, can we put concepts together? Can we bind them together even when there's no perceptual content? Because he distinguishes between perceptual judgments and then a priori judgments, or the putting together of two concepts to make knowledge. And this is actually the essence of what reason is here. It's that so much of our knowledge is this ability to see how concepts are linked, cause and effect, subject, object, these type of things. They all are linked, but how are they linked? And it's reason that's like that allows us to discover it's like how they are a unity. But critically, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here into 13. I'm a little bit unsure, but this is, yeah, I think I'll save that bit for 13, because I think it's in 13 he really says how Kant is like rooted in his, how can we call it, epistemic subjectiveness. It's like didn't find a way out of himself. Okay, but this is what is happening in this book. It's a realization that when we make synthetic judgments, these aren't subjective fantasies, because thinking is about establishing conceptual relationships. Reason is about establishing conceptual relationships which are true in themselves, and they reveal themselves in thinking, and therefore the subjectivism that plagues Kant no longer applies when we realize that, because we talked last time, I think it was chapter 10, the important distinction between the activity of thinking and where we become aware of it. Consciousness is subjective. Absolutely. Yeah. Each one of our consciousness, we've got different content in our consciousness the whole time. But thinking, this supraconscious, this transcendental faculty, activity that lives in us, that is beyond the subjective and the objective, it is that which is working within reason and showing how, like, the inherent lawfulness of whatever it is that we're looking at means that these belong together. Yeah, so the importance of when we have a clearer understanding of the importance of the intellect, the analytical versus reason, or you used the recomposition, I think you said, Jeff, when you describe it, how these are fundamental characteristics of thinking which we can all phenomenologically observe. We don't need an expert to tell us it's there. So like, yeah, I divide up the world and I put it together as well. And these are, it's like the essence of these processes that happen in me. And yeah, we can land in that truth about ourselves.
I wonder if there's a, there's this term infinite regress, right? And clearly the analytical left to its own devices moves into infinite regress. It's an improper way to think from a scientific standpoint. And, philosophers have recognized this, right? But I wonder if there's an opposite term for infinite regress, because I think that's kind of what we're talking about when we say the essential being dissolves into.
Do you mean reductionism?
Yeah, well, reductionism is one scientific version of why infinite regress is the explanation of why reductionism is untrue and not scientific and harmful if left to its own device. But I wonder if there's an opposite to that, to infinite regress, right? And in dealing with these opposites, I can't help but think of Lucifer and Ahriman. I just can't get around it. Like the scientific endeavor, if we're left to Hegel, we would end up to be Luciferic. We would live in a totalitarian society. It seems to me that the left has, it's a new understanding for me that the illiberal left that that used to be liberal and I used to consider myself part of, what was tending toward the Luciferic, right? They tend to be pragmatists. They tend to buy into the natural scientific paradigm and think that people are stupid if right. And so that one-sidedness turned the left into Ahriman's pawns, say, into mere analytic professionalists who are seeking to control everything. These are the people that we trusted. I trusted growing up, that sort of thing. So I just wanted to put that out there. This is why this is serious business for me in part. And then I want to go back to this the Dancerly thing because he mentions the human heart. Steiner does in this chapter, and he doesn't mention it in relationship to feeling. He just says, as opposed to the intellect, we have the activity of the heart, right? And I don't think he means this merely sentimentally, like the Valentine heart, right? Yet I don't think he quite understands at this age how right he is physiologically about what the heart does and its function on a physiological, soul, and spiritual level, as a device that stands between the two poles of the neurological analytical system and the metabolic resolution-y system, the one that turns things into nothingness, and that becomes you, right? That's what nutrition is, right? It is the absolute dissolution of the substance you put in your body, and it passes mysteriously into the bloodstream. And then the heart is there as a physiological organ that perceives, cognitively perceives. And that's what he's talking about there. It's not just feeling, right? Feeling is really important. And the heart is the place where there's this rhythmic, fluid, bringing bringing that fluid back into form, and then out it goes again into the estuaries of the arterial system, and that is the dissolution, in a sense, you could say. But the important part here is that Steiner refers to this self, this at first subjective self, as the ego, and that the ego is actually carried in the blood, that the organ for the ego is the blood, right? And so that means that organ has agency. It moves itself. It's not pumped by the blood. As Steiner would later say, one of the worst things we could ever do is describe the heart as a mechanical pump, because it would not give the because then we would never be able to perceive it for what it actually is and then utilize it in that fashion. So these are just really impressions based on this chapter that I wanted to share, partly because I've been looking back into the heart. And I would say also, finally, that this is where Ian McGilchrist has got it wrong. And I think in his heart, he knows better, but he's not taken the next step that other people who have studied the heart as a cognitive organ say. It's got many functions, but it's definitely cognitive. It has 60% more neuronal activity than the brain does. It's an organ of intense perception. So what he's missing in his left brain, right brain, is the thing that mediates between that which is combining, and which we're sort of over romanticizing. Because why? Because the analytical is ripping things apart, so we want to react to that, right? But we have to keep them separate. And reason isn't the be all to end all. It's not thinking. Thinking can saturate reasoning, and thinking can saturate the analytical and the perceptual and the feeling life because of the human heart, is my contention.
Did you want to add something there, Alexander?
I think the only thing that I was thinking about, especially about this aspect that he brings up here, unity through feeling or unity through reason, and the "or" is here inserted by myself. He doesn't use it, but it I was thinking how we can bring these two together. And if I look back to me personally, but also to a lot of young people that I see around me, I think many people feel the unity and are a bit, again, it's that suffering, that pain of realizing and looking into the world that feeling is not respected. I think what reason gives us is the discernment of how to bring that feeling into the world in a way that is aligned with the world as well. The world, I mean reality, of course, how phenomena actually, the lawfulness of phenomena. So I think these two it's important to bring these two together. At one point I was thinking that it makes sense also to look into this in the perspective of how consciousness develops. That we're sort of leaving behind us the unity through feeling in order to develop the unity through reason. But I think it's important to bring that these two are, that we don't leave one behind us. We're just seeing how the unity through feeling by itself is not enough in our time. We need reason as well. That's what I wanted to add.
I'm wondering if you mean that either I've misunderstood you or you've used a word that I didn't expect, but it's like we need the analytic or the intellect to become conscious of certain aspects of reality, but then by becoming aware of certain aspects, we then need to recombine them using reason. Or did I was surprised that you used the word reason in that context.
Oh, I used reason in the as Steiner is using, as holistic.
As the
thinking.
unifying.
Yeah. I skipped the intellect altogether. But of course it's important as well. But he speaks about, let's see if I can find it here. I mean, he speaks about somewhere about how there are people there are people that grasp unity through feeling.
Yeah.
And they sort of criticize the intellect because they see how it brings separation.
Yeah.
But they sort of stay in the feeling of
yeah.
unity. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So the knowledge aspect.
Yeah, my point was, well, I think it's not enough. We need to bring reason as a quality into our relationship with unity.
I think we might be finding a difference of opinion on this one.
Oh, good.
No. Now I'm in full agreement with what Alexander said, without any doubt.
I'm talking about me.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Jeff.
I think that reason has intellect in it, and intellect has reason in it. And I want to go to we talked about the two words diablos, the fragmentation, and symbolos. And that's a word that's very near and dear to me. And I don't think it's the opposite of diablos. And I don't think reason by itself can profoundly influence a coming together. There's a need in reason that is largely goes unrecognized, that has to do with making combinations, right? Putting things together, such that you ultimately end up with a intellectual combination, I would say. Right. So that is the metamodern move of one-worlding, while forgetting about the subjective self. It's a Kantian move in a certain way, because the subjective self is crucial here. And the subjective self is the symbolos, I would say. It is the agency that and the presence that brings together that not just brings together, but is the bringing together embodied of these two polarities, while keeping them separate. And they need to be kept separate. Within reason, we need intellect, and we need to be able to be tractive in our. We can't get any traction without intellect in our reasoning, and we can't, and we fall apart if there's no reason in our intellect, in our analytics. And it is the thinking, feeling, and willing self that he says something beautifully here. He says, and I'm just paraphrasing, I'm not quoting him. Basically, the self-consciousness or the self-bias, the biased self, doesn't live in some unconscious where a bunch of concepts exist and that's where the bias comes from. It's biased because it's an individual form that is ready in waiting for taking up the task of thinking, a thinking that unifies these two aspects and saturates them, saturates the feeling, saturates the willing, saturates perception, that thinking and reasoning aren't the same. Again, I would like to say, and this in conclusion, this self that exists as a reality, as a spiritual continuum of the totality and the individuating form, because we need both of those things. And that's what we do that the angels don't do, is do both.
Well, I agree with you, Jeff. So when I skipped the intellect, I didn't mean as a criticism. It's just that it wasn't present in his reflection or in his writing here as an element that brings us into unity. But I agree with you that we're not, I mean, it's not, we're not supposed to lose ourselves in some sort of union with the total universe.
Right, and subjectivity is not a bad thing. Right? It
Right.
is a crucial thing. It
Yeah.
is the crucis. It is the hanging on the cross that brings the two tensions together. So it's crucial that it be subjective. I mean, we in our society we glorify objectivity so much that we objectify even the subjective, which is it's an improper move. We can have the subjective and objective and overcome the divide, right? We don't. It's not that they disappear, the subjective and the objective, or percept and concept. They don't disappear. They're properly connected. And I'm not saying you're not saying this, you know, but
no, yeah.
But I'm always here to what do you say? To become deeperly to become more to become more intimate with being and my being and my being, right? So
Yeah.
so again, like this is partly the societal healing that we have to do. I mean, what we're talking about is healing, right? The bringing together of the rifts of that have been kept apart and seen as separate. Religion and science, art and science, art and religion, education and the state, whatever, you know, whatever these multipolar traps that we fall into, and the phenomenology of the self is crucial to this, both the universalizing and the particularizing differentiation process.
That was
Thank
a
you for
nice lead in, Jeff, there to chapter 13, because there's one sentence that I've highlighted to set the ball rolling, and it might set it vigorously rolling. So this is the sentence that I highlighted. With thinking, we're in the first paragraph, with thinking, it is only necessary for us to overcome our own subjective limitations in order to grasp its core. So how I'm trying to understand what you're meaning with subjective when you see it there. I'll read the sentence again, but I'd like you to sort of like to take a stance against what's being said here, and then perhaps we could sort of like flesh out how crucial it is in this amazing chapter 13. Okay, so I'll just read it out again. With thinking, it is only necessary for us to overcome our own subjective limitations in order to grasp its core. What do you think, either of you, Alexander or Jeff? What do you think's going on there? What's he trying to wake us up to?
I think that we're creators and we're self-determining, and that we have to keep doing it. That is what I took from that, is that we're limited in our subjectivity for the reason of overcoming the limitation. And we don't overcome the limitation if we depend on one or the other extreme of, or just feeling, like any of those cognitive elements, or just perception, or whatever your, you know, your version of breatharian is, right? Like that at the core is what he calls thought, and that it's at the core of existence. It's the essential being that is giving rise to this subjective self that becomes the vehicle, right, to becomes a vehicle that develops the capacity to pull the polarities together. That was my take on that.
Alexander, do you want to comment? Or
No, I think he, in that sentence, he is sort of introducing what he will develop in this chapter, and it is that, well, he's going to say that thought is, there's an universal objective aspect to thought, or to the idea, isn't it? And that we're usually caught up in our own thoughts, or our thoughts as being our own, as being unique, as being, well, they can be copyrighted, can't they? They maybe have never existed before. So subjective in that sense, that they are our own. And also in the sense, taking it, I mean, maybe not in that extreme, but it could be, if we go to the extreme, that, well, my thoughts are not compatible with others' thoughts. And we can see that sometimes in our individual conflicts, but that becomes more present in the way some sciences combat each other, but even more when nations or religions enter into wars of different kinds with each other. So he's pointing to the fact that we can find a universality in ideas that can bring us together. But that doesn't mean, I mean, going back to Jeff's comments before, and I think that was very important what you brought up, Jeff, that doesn't mean that our individuality is central, and that we are unique, the uniqueness that every one of us is central. And that's, I mean, I can only affect the world out of my own individuality, not from a unity or a totality with the world out there. So I think that sort of paradox is important to come to terms with. We don't lose ourselves in this process. I think it's the other way around. We gain more and more, or our boundaries, they expand in order for us to participate in the world more and more. But we don't lose ourselves in it.
Yeah, the more integrity of form, the more coherent of form, the more iterative of the universal.
Mm.
I like the way you spell out there, Alex, that he's really announcing what's going to be happening in this chapter, and he's already been sowing the seeds in the previous chapters as well, which I think we've also been sensing. One way for me of understanding what's going on here is we often use the phrase, like especially within anthroposophy, that's like we're Kantian thinkers. What does that mean? Or what might be one way of describing that? Or a modern thinker is a Kantian thinker. It's this idea that all of our thoughts are merely subjective thoughts. There's no reality to these thoughts. And one of the things that Steiner mentions, that Kant said, this faculty of reasoning, it's a regulatory faculty that allows us as human beings to organize things, but it has no objective nature. And what he's demonstrated here is no, it's the opposite. It's like in reason we are finding the objective nature for being able to, it's like perform, it's like have these synthetic judgments. And when we realize that it's like what thinking really is, because this is what we've been doing since the beginning of this book. So first we looked at pure experience, but since chapter 6, it's been a phenomenology of thinking. It's like how does it live and work? And so one of those things that we've talked about on several occasions is it is the discover of lawfulness. But this isn't a subjective, it's like act that is going on. It's happening in the subjective consciousness, yeah. But the act itself is not I'm going to decide that this and that is true. Thinking is revealing to me that that is true. And the really confusing bit is that I have to be active in that process for that, so that synthetic activity to be able to have, for that reasoning to being able to bring these together. And so when we really do begin to think about thinking, so like make thinking the subject of our own thinking, it is revealing its own essential nature. So when I think about thinking, I am that which reveals the essence of everything else to me in the world. Without thinking, the world is senseless. There is no meaning in there. So I use that to understand the world. But that same activity could be turned back onto itself. Our channel is even called it. It's the exceptional state. So when we enter into that exceptional state, what we begin to discover is this Kantian idea that these are just subjective, synthetic judgments. It's completely false. We are entering into that activity that allows us to like unify everything. We are that activity. So when I talked about I had like almost a religious experience, so like so many things came together in this chapter for me. I just randomly pulled one line, and if you'd have given me half an hour, I could have found 30 of them. It's like in the Upanishads. This is the Upanishads like describing what Brahman is. This is an identical description of thinking, discovering its own inner nature, its own essence. This is from the Catholic Upanishad. The self is hidden in all beings and does not shine forth. It is seen by subtle seers through their sharp and subtle intellect. If that isn't a summary of it's like what Steiner is saying about the essence of thinking, I don't know what is, but the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and of course the Bible as well, but so especially in Eastern literature, we find this clarity which is down to a word, apart from the word that they use Brahman as the word, but they are talking about thinking. They are talking about the essence. So Brahman is the essence, or the self is the essence of that which has created everything. In thinking, we are participating in that very essence. And this is just, it enters us as like a completely different level when we begin to realize how this isn't a subjective activity that's going on in you, Angus. This is a universal process, and you are fortunate enough not only to take part in it, but also realize that it's happening in you. So it's stunning. I'll leave it at that. For I might have more to say about this chapter. But,
I think that's beautiful, Agnes. I didn't take it that far, but because I'm still probably still haven't fully realized what participating in the universality of thinking actually means. I can see how it brings humanity together into one human world.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, Alexander. Again, I agree. That was beautiful, Angus. You've said similar things before, but you're clearly speaking out of a different depth of your experience, and he brings experience back into this chapter, by the way, which is really profound, I think, in the way he uses it. But what was it that you mentioned earlier that I was going to address in relationship to what you just said? It's escaped me. I'll come back to it. Oh, I know what it was. We have a sense for that which is partial, right? We know what's whole, and we know it's partial, right? And I think that's what not only what Angus is saying, but what you said earlier as relates to. God, I forgot what it was.
Dancing, perhaps?
What's that?
Dancing? Was it when he was talking about dancing?
No, it had to do with partial knowledge or something along those lines. Something that indicates that which is underlying, like a question indicates, is composed of the answers. It has something to do with something like that, but I'll try.
You or me, Alex? Would you like to say something, or I can add some more?
And there's another theme here, maybe, that I could bring up. But if you have something to add,
no, you go ahead first. You go ahead first.
I was just thinking there's something in the middle of the chapter that is interesting, and he sort of delineates what he believes an epistemology or science of knowledge should consist of.
Mm-hmm.
He brings up 3 points. The first one is that it should bring incomplete experience, which is, I think, pure experience, as we've looked into a couple of sessions ago. It should bring incomplete experience to completion by revealing its core or essence, as we've been speaking today. It should determine what this essence is with respect to its content. This core or essence is thought or idea. And the third one, which I think it's interesting, because it's one that we haven't really, or Steiner hasn't really gone deeply into, it must show how this revelation takes place. And I think that's a bit what you, Angus, was speaking about when we turn our observation into thinking itself. That's how we become aware of how this revelation takes place. We need to be aware of the process of knowledge, the process of thinking, and discern. And again, it's an analytical process to begin with, because we need to sort of discern all its different nuances and aspects, and how we use words and what they mean, and how do we apply them, and maybe how they make us feel, if they turn towards unity or if they turn towards separateness. And without judgment, we're just observing and trying to understand our process of knowledge.
I've perhaps a little bit where this experience of going far beyond anything I'd ever experienced when reading Steiner before. I've managed to locate in my thinking, so like where it was triggered, and it was in the sixth. It was in the sixth paragraph, and he's talking a lot about this idea of transgression. Now, I'm not, again, because you know my process, I might not be using the exact wording he uses in the English, but I'll read like my summaries of 4 lines of his and see if you also begin to pick up on this is going far beyond. So he says, whenever the essence of being is sought, we must resort to the ideal content. We must resort to thinking. The realm of content may not be transgressed if one wishes to remain in clear determinings or terms or definitions. Thinking is a totality that cannot be transgressed if we don't want to end up in emptiness. In other words, it cannot take refuge in things outside itself to explain something. This is the opposite of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It's saying that when you are in the realm of thinking, you are in that realm in which anything can possibly be known, and you cannot even think about going outside the realm of thinking to discover something about the world. And this is where so the images of Brahman and Atman and all those type of things, this is identical. This is completely different language, but conceptually it's identical. The whole, we are talking about the whole of everything. And Steiner is leading us into, through his phenomenology of thinking, into experiencing directly how it cannot be any other way. How am I to know the world if it's not through thinking? And he even at the end, I think, is it the end of this one? He's right at the end of this chapter. He goes off on a little sort of like a little jaunt where he talks about people like want to invoke forces or powers and say sort of like these are also like essential realities. And his riposte is like it has always been throughout this. Yeah, like force and power might be needed, but if we're going to know the essence of that force or power, it is only through thinking that we will do so. We might experience it differently, but if we want to know its essence, that is only possible by allowing the activity to thinking to live in us. Yeah. Should we move on to 14? Or did anybody want to reflect on that?
Just
a nice short one.
Just a brief addition to that. It's striking, first of all, but it brings me back to philosophy of freedom when he says, I live, or I have a self, I have a being by the grace of thinking. So not only, right, so we can't I'll just leave there, right? So we're cognitive beings. We're not necessarily thinking beings until we invite that into our lives, something like that. and then
I think you've said,
and then it determines us in a certain sense, or we determine ourselves with it. And that's why the subjective is so important, because it's a transparent process, and it ceases to be unreal or a simulation when it becomes transparent to us.
I think you performed an important mental act there, Jeff, in the sense that now, so that mysterious sentence, that single sentence, I live by the grace of thinking, which has this beautiful, it's like wholesome truth feeling about it. We can intuit how it rings true. But here, when we're led through to discover ourselves, the nature of thinking, we begin to experience it as even truer, that we can go beyond it's like a mere feeling reaction to that statement, and which we might even be able to argue from a certain perspective. But now we have a far richer conceptual life. It's like a clarity about the nature of thinking in relationship to experience, in which that single sentence becomes something on which we can meditate on that and feel how this is true from so many angles. So this condensing act that you did there is this synthesizing process that's going on. How can I these are pages and pages of writing with dense words, and sometimes I might get a bit lost, but can I find a sentence that encapsulates all of that and then allow that to live in me? And it becomes a different experience when we work through this type of material. So, the last one, chapter 14. We're back to Kant, aren't we, really, here? I suppose my understanding of this is if you that sentence there, the one that I highlighted, that I read out, we're thinking it is only necessary for us to overcome our own subjective limitations in order to grasp its core. If we really grasp that there and then chapter 14 becomes a statement of the obvious. But he's mapping it out for us here, and he reminds us that Kant was looking for a ground of certainty. So Hume had destroyed our faith in thinking, because it's just like an arbitrary connecting of thoughts. It's habits, that as Hume would say. So this arch skepticism, we can't know anything about the world. We can't even know that the sun's going to go up tomorrow. We can only talk about its likelihood. So certainties we can't have. And Kant, do you remember when we did the football game, the Germans against the English? It's that type of thing that's going on. Kant wanted that certainty. He wanted thinking to regain a firm footing, but he was only partially able to do this. And what Steiner is mapping out here is how not only how this is done, but he's also revealing, he goes on to talk about two types of dogma in thinking, and these dogma, he talks about the dogma of revelation and the dogma of experience. It's how does thinking pervert itself, or how does thinking lose itself? It's it's like an understanding of its own nature. One, it can look at the authority of revelations, and then just try to attempt to prove how it's true. But that's using thinking as a tool rather than thinking to discover its own nature. And the other dogma is the dogma of experience, which we're more familiar with, where we've got the same thing going on. It's like thinking being used in the service of understanding the world around us, but not understanding itself. And therefore, it's like becoming, so in the case of experience, where he talks about positivism in the previous chapter, we become a slave to the idea that's like truth is only in what the senses give to us. I only believe in that is true, that which I can see. And these are ways in which we, as spiritual human beings, we lose ourselves in a certain type of experience. But when we begin to wake up to, it's like thinking is at the essence of knowledge here, and our own responsibility in that activity. It is an active activity. We have to participate in it. It's not something that is just received. And this is where the dogmas of both dogmas are the opposite. It's like saying the truth is in revelation, it's out there. It's like X-Files, isn't it? The truth is out there type of thing. It's not. Half of reality is out there, but the truth, the essence, comes from thinking. And in the same direction, in the realm of experience, the truth isn't out there in the world. Separation is out there once I start getting my intellect involved. The truth is found in thinking, which is an activity which I, as a spiritual being, am actively participating in. And he goes on to conclude, it's like, this is why he feels himself in total sympathy. He doesn't actually mention Goethe at this point, but Goethe has made statements about anthropomorphism, and it's a criticism of the type of anthropomorphic thinking. And he basically makes a statement: how is any knowledge possible without the human being? The human being is the tool for knowing the world. It ain't a computer. It's not a microscope. It's not this and that. It is the human being. And you can, only people who are blind to the true nature of thinking could believe otherwise. That was my takeaway, or one of my takeaways from that chapter. What about you guys?
Well, I enjoyed this definition of the dogma of revelation and the dogma of experience, and I was thinking about this now when you were speaking, Angus, and I don't know if it makes sense, but this idea just came to me. And someone spoke up, I think it was you, Jeff. You were speaking about imminence and transcendence before. And well, I was just thinking, I mean, if we look into the dogma of revelation and overcome it, we arrive at imminence. If we look into the dogma of experience and overcome it, we arrive at transcendence. I thought it was interesting that these two aspects are again complementary in a way. They're two polarities. We overcome both, and we see how immanence and transcendence are two aspects of reality that we need to bring together again, and how they complement each other. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Beautiful sense. You've given me, as a wrap up, wants to add something from the Ishu Upanishad, which says exactly what you say there, Alexander. Is poetry. Truth becomes poetry. Jeff, did you want to do that, or shall I just read? Shall I sign out with this part of the verse from the Ishu Upanishad?
I just wanted to quickly respond to that beautiful description.
Yeah, go for it.
Because the transcendent can only be done by an individual. We can only transcend ourselves, and in doing so, we become free, right? We become who we through our intention, through purpose-laden intention, we become more than who we are now. And at the other gate, it's the self that you have to dissolve in order for it to be resolved into the imminent. And to me, this is epistemological groundwork for karma and reincarnation. I just want to put that there because I think these are that's a proof of concept to me.
Shall I wind up with the quote? So this is at the towards the end of the Ishu Upanishad. Into deep darkness fall those who follow the immanent. Into deeper darkness fall those who follow the transcendent. One is the outcome of the transcendent, and another is the outcome of the immanent. Thus we have heard from the ancient sages who explained this truth to us. He who knows both the transcendent and the immanent, with the immanent overcomes death, and with the transcendent reaches immortality. Button time.